The next two episodes are going to be much more personal. I've been wanting to share an experience I had a few years ago with an ex, someone that I dated, and I want to share with you everything that I learned through that experience. The lessons I learned, things I learned about myself and how this relationship mirrored family dynamics, the ways in which part of my shadow was at play, how this connects to our collective experience in so many ways, on so many levels. And so next week, I really want to share with you all those lessons, the things that I learned, the takeaways, the wisdom that I would like to pass on to you based on this experience that I had. And this week, I want to share the story itself, what actually happened with this person. And I really questioned myself around why I wanted to share this story with you because it's not a normal story. It's very sensational. It's unbelievable in a lot of ways. I was actually approached at one point by someone who was interested in potentially featuring this story on Netflix. So it is out of the norm. At the same time, so many elements of it reflect situations and dynamics and relationships that a lot of people experience and may not be aware are unhealthy, have elements and components of emotional, psychological abuse and manipulation. And so, in trying to decide why is it that I actually want to tell this story, because I could just share the lessons, the learnings, the takeaways without actually telling you what happened with this person. I felt very conflicted and I needed to process it with some friends. And what came through out of that processing was very interesting, especially in regards to why I felt so conflicted. And I'm going to share more about that in next week's episode when I talk about how this relationship reflected some of my family dynamics and the internalization of certain things I had experienced that I then normalized in the context of this relationship. So I'm going to talk more about that specifically next week. But for now, I do want to share why I decided to tell you the actual story. And there are a few different reasons. The first is that this is not the first time I've shared this story, but it is the first time I've shared this story from this place because I have healed so much since then. And the other times that I've shared the story have been on other people's podcasts, but it was very fresh. I shared the story not long after the experience itself. And I just don't think it was the right time. I don't think I was really ready to be talking about this in a public way. Because the truth is that I was telling the story from a place of rage and resentment. Whereas now that I have done so much healing around this, I can share the story from a much more grounded, centered place. And I want to do that. So, one of the other reasons is that I had actually at that time been working on a project to create a limited series podcast about that situation specifically. I had mapped out 12 episodes. I was recording, and it was bringing up too much of the rage and resentment. I was stuck in that place, especially because going through the process of birthing this project required me to be in the nitty-gritty details of the experience, which was very activating for me. I met my current partner around the same time that I was working on that and just realized it really isn't serving me to do this right now. I just want to focus on building trust with this person that I'm exploring a connection with because I was incredibly distrustful. And being in the details of this story was not helping me at all. So I put that project aside, and I honestly haven't even considered revisiting it. Maybe I will some point in the future, and maybe I never will. And so there's something about that process of self-expression that I was in the midst of that feels a bit incomplete or unfinished or unresolved. And so there's some part of me that wants to tell the story for that part of me that wanted to tell it then. And I also want to tell the story because I do think that so many people experience similar dynamics in relationships, but can't name that it's abuse because of their past, because of dynamics in their family. And it is very normal and common that we repeat patterns that we experienced with our parents, that we repeat them in the context of our relationships. And this is one of the reasons why it can be hard for us to see that the dynamics are dysfunctional because they feel normal to us. And that normalization of those experiences also leads us to doubt and question ourselves and our own discernment and our own intuition. And I'll speak a lot more about that aspect next week as well. But that's another reason why I want to share the story. It's because I know that I am not alone. And again, like I said, this story is a bit extreme. So there are aspects of it that will not be relevant to a lot of people's experience, but many of the parts and pieces of this story will be relevant to many of you and many people that you know. And so I also want to share this story to validate your own experience if you've had a similar experience with a similar type of person. I will say also that this relationship and this experience was an exception for me. What I have found with so many people that I've worked with, people that I know, is that we really do tend to be in patterns around these kinds of dynamics in our relationships, these patterns that mirror our family dynamics. For me, that has not been the case, which is not that common, I think. I have certainly dated people or had connections with people who were very emotionally immature or emotionally unavailable, but I've never before dated a person like this person I'm about to tell you about. Partnerships, my relationships, long-term relationships, have all been with very incredible people. And not to say that our relationships had no issues, no challenges, no conflict, but they have been nothing like this. I just wanted to put that out there because I do think it's a little bit outside of the norm that a relationship that reflected so many aspects and elements of my childhood is really an anomaly for me. For most people, our relationship patterns follow more of an actual pattern than they have for me personally. Another thing I want to name is that it is not my intention to demonize this individual, to out him or expose him. I will be using a pseudonym, a fake name for him and for all the other people involved in the story. I always have. Anytime I've told the story, I have used different names. So I'm not trying to create any kind of public shame or cancellation campaign around this individual. So that just feels important to say. The other piece is that in order for you to understand the dynamics that I come from, it's also important to name a bit of what my environment, my life was like in childhood. And I'm not going to go into details with that, but I do just want to give you some context so you can also better understand how some of these patterns were repeating when I tell you about the lessons that I learned next week. My dad was an alcoholic. He did a lot of drugs. He was a very inconsistent, unstable, unpredictable person. We have speculated that he might potentially have bipolar disorder. He was very physically abusive and violent with my mom. He was not as physically abusive with us as kids, though there were like a few instances that I experienced physical abuse from him, but it was primarily just like witnessing very horrific physical abuse that my mom experienced. And we were really unsafe a lot of the time. There were many times where we had to leave our home. There were times when he was threatening to kill us. There were times when he tried. On the other hand, my mom actually was very physically abusive with me. And she was also very controlling, whereas my father was a bit more absent. He wasn't as present in my life, and my mom was like too present, too involved in everything. She would punish me in really twisted ways, very severe ways. There was a lot of verbal abuse from both of them. More psychological abuse, manipulation was coming from my mom. And I feel kind of a lot of inner conflict and guilt even naming those things about my parents. It's not my intention to demonize them either. Actually, it's my ability to humanize them, which I think is part of what might have been hard for me to see the reality of what I was experiencing in this relationship. At some point in the future, I'll probably share more of my experience in detail with my parents, but I just want to give you a bit of an overview of the context. And even as I'm going to talk about this relationship that I had with my ex and this story, I'm also kind of just giving the overview, the bigger picture for the most part. It's just too much to go into the details. There's just too much to share. So I met this individual who I will call Daniel. I met Daniel in the fall of 2021. I met him on Bumble, the app. I was already living here in Mexico at the time. He was living abroad, but he is from Mexico, so he was here visiting his family when I met him. We have a lot in common. He seems really interesting. I find him very attractive. We went on our first date and there was some kind of connection, but I wouldn't say that I was enthralled or very taken by this person. But I was curious. I was very open to continuing to get to know him, to explore the connection, to meet up with him again. And so we did. We started doing different things, going on dates. He introduced me to friends of his. And he was very insistent pretty early on that he wanted something serious with me. And I was not really sure about that because he didn't live here. He was saying that his intention was to move back. He had been living in Italy for almost 20 years, and he was saying that he wanted to come back. His mom was in poor health. He wanted to be closer to his family. His brother had a couple of children that he wanted to be around for. And so, he's telling me, well, I'm going to be moving back and I want to be with you. And I shared 1 or 2 episodes ago that I have an anxious avoidant attachment style. So if someone feels very cold and distant and they're not really showing a lot of interest in me, that's when my anxious attachment kicks in. But when somebody is overly interested, and very eager to be connected to me, I'm a little bit like, "Ugh," like, I don't know about this. And that's kind of what I was feeling. Like it was just feeling a little bit overwhelming, like too much for me. But I was also really enjoying the time that I was spending with him. At the same time, though, I did feel a kind of pressure. It was something that he would bring up all the time, how much he liked me, how he had never met anyone like me. He didn't know anyone else who had so much in common with him. He had strong feelings for me, et cetera, et cetera. And then he ended up telling me that he was going to need to go back to Italy sooner than planned and that he would be leaving Mexico City. He left, he went back. He was communicating with me a lot. He would send me texts all the time. He would send me selfies. He would send me videos of himself talking to me. He sent me gifts to my apartment. He was just showing a lot of interest, giving me a lot of attention, offering a lot of validation, telling me that he really wanted to be with me when he came back, when he moved here. And over the course of those few months, he had left, I guess it was October, and then he had come back in February of 2022. And in the span of those months, I fell for this guy. I fell in love with him. I felt like I could really envision a future with him. I wanted to be with him when he came back. And we had agreed that he would spend maybe a month. I don't even remember exactly, but he was going to stay with me for a few weeks at least when he first came back in February. So he came to my place, and the first couple of days were okay, but then it was like he just started behaving kind of oddly. And it seemed like he was trying to find reasons to leave. He was sort of creating these stories about how he was invading my space and how I was not happy with him being there. And it was like he was trying to find a reason not to stay with me anymore, which he did eventually go to stay with his brother. But it was like this kind of different sort of behavior that I started to notice. It became more and more. And it became more frequent that I didn't really understand what exactly is going on. What exactly is this person wanting? He's very inconsistent. He says these kinds of things, he shows me these other kinds of things. I just felt very confused. There was also this kind of thing that just kept coming up again and again and again around him wanting to have children and me being very clear that I don't want to have kids of my own. I really have never wanted that. And if we are on different pages about that, it doesn't make sense for us to be together. But it was like every time I would say something like that, he would dismiss what he had been telling me about his desires and say like, no, no, it's fine, I don't really need to have kids, I'm getting older now anyway, it's not that important. He would always say that, but then he would always bring it up again, and it was almost like this constant point of contention between us. He would make plans with me and then cancel them at the last minute. We ended up planning a trip to Cancun together, and we planned to go there for 10 days in March of 2022. Things were even weirder there, more inconsistency, more kind of these weird dynamics where I just felt very confused. There was also this just like constant conflict over things that didn't really make sense. For example, I was just kind of going with the flow. We can do whatever. I don't really have a strong opinion about this thing or that thing. And then he would kind of get annoyed with me because I wasn't being more decisive about certain things, but really insignificant things like what table are we going to sit at a restaurant? He would get annoyed with me. But then if I did have some opinion, like, oh, actually, the AC is too strong there, or the music is too loud there, can we go over there? Then he would be annoyed. And he would kind of almost try to paint this picture like I was being very difficult. And I was like, well, you were just complaining that I wasn't being decisive, and now I'm being decisive, and you're saying that is difficult. And it was like these kinds of things just were happening more and more and more, to the point where I was just starting to feel anxious and very unsettled. Why are we arguing about these really inconsequential things? That part was very consistent. And it was like he was also trying to somehow prove to me or make some kind of point about how he didn't have a lot of money, which, from my experiences with him prior, I really didn't have any kind of impression that money was any kind of issue for him. When we first arrived there, we were ordering drinks on the beach, and he made some kind of comment about how grateful he was that he didn't have to worry about money at this point in his life, that he was doing well for himself and he could order whatever he wanted. And I said something like, oh, well, you've definitely made comments recently about how that isn't the case. So, like I said, I didn't have the impression that money was an issue for him, but he would talk about it like it was, but he wouldn't behave as if it was, if that makes sense. So, when he made this comment, I kind of was like, but you've said things that are counter to that. And he was like, so weird, because then he just decided he needed to change his order to spend less money. And then he would start doing these things over the course of the trip to prove to me that he was worried about money. So, for example, there was one day when we were switching accommodations, and I had a call with a client scheduled, and I really needed to be at the new accommodation by a certain time. And I also needed to eat before that. And so we're trying to get a taxi, and it's so unbelievably hot and humid, and we're standing on the side of the road. And there are so many people that won't take us to where we need to go. Finally, somebody stops that is willing to take us, and he sends the car away. And at this point, we have been trying to get a ride for 45 minutes. And I'm like, I really have to get to this appointment. Why did you send the car away? And he's like, because he was trying to overcharge me by 20 pesos. And 20 pesos is like the equivalent of $1. And I was like, why would you send away the car over $1? And he's like, it's the principle. Like they're trying to cheat me. And that was another thing that he would kind of make comments about a lot. Like if somebody gave him 1 cent less than he was supposed to receive at the 7-Eleven, he was outraged about the principle of this person being unethical and him being cheated out of 1 cent. There were just these really weird things that were happening that I felt so strange about. And then while we were on this trip, so he has a cousin that lives out there, and we had seen her a few times. And there was one night where we're at dinner with this cousin, and she was talking about something difficult that she was going through, and she started crying. And Daniel went to sit beside her to hug her. And it was like one part of me thought, he's so sweet and caring and kind. But at the same time, I had a voice in my head that was like, he's so fake. This is a performance. He's performing right now. I would have these moments in different situations or scenarios where it was like a part of me was seeing all this good in him, and another part of me had this feeling that it wasn't real. It was just very disorienting. The whole experience was very disorienting. And we get back from that trip, and a couple of weeks later, I went to the US to visit my family for Easter. And he broke up with me the day before I left. But then he came with me to the airport and he was crying. And then we had a few conversations while I was away. I had gone for 2 weeks, and he was saying that he really wanted to keep trying and to work things out, and that we would talk when I got back. And while I was there, I had a dream one night. I had a dream that I had gotten pregnant in a very violent way, and that as I was there pregnant, he left me for his ex-girlfriend. And I woke up for this dream, and it's so hard to put into words, but it was like the dream felt like a prophecy, a premonition, a psychic knowing. And I was so upset by the dream. I just was sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And I decided to try to figure out who his ex-girlfriends were, to go on Facebook and see if I could figure that out based on the limited information that I knew about them. He had never told me their names. I didn't know what they looked like, but there was something in me that felt like, you need to know this. What he had shared with me about his exes is basically he had told me about two significant relationships he had been in. The first was with a woman in Italy that he had met shortly after moving there, and that they had been together for about 10 years. And then he had gone to Hong Kong to do a master's program. He had gone there, and he decided that he really didn't want to live in Italy anymore. And he was asking her if she would be open to leaving, and she was not open to it. And it just created this rift in their relationship. And so they broke up not that long after he arrived in Hong Kong. And not long after that, he met a French woman in Hong Kong who was working there, and they got into a relationship, and they eventually moved to Spain together. And he had been living in Spain in a relationship with this woman for 6 years. And then he said that he had moved back to Italy after he had broken up with her, and that he had been single for the last year leading up to when he had met me, that he did not keep in contact with his exes, that he didn't have any kind of relationship or communication with either of them. Okay, so this is what I knew about his relationship history. And based on what I knew and comments on pictures and stuff like that, I did piece together who are these people. And like I said, I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to know that. I also, after this dream, I was like, I really think I'm pregnant. It was like I wasn't feeling right. Something kind of felt off physically. I just had this sense like I'm also pregnant. I ended up getting a pregnancy test. I wouldn't take it. I had so much resistance to actually knowing the answer, but I did know the answer. I just could feel it in my body. I just knew. And I ended up taking the pregnancy test the day before I was supposed to leave the US and come back to Mexico. And it was positive. And I was terrified. Like, how am I going to tell this person who, just tried to break up with me, who is now saying he wants to come and pick me up from the airport and wants to talk, but who also I've had this ongoing conflict with around his desire to have kids and my desire not to. And how am I supposed to tell him that I'm actually pregnant and that I don't want to have a child and that I think the best thing for me and for us is to terminate the pregnancy? And how am I going to tell him this? I was so anxious. I was so terrified. And he had also told me maybe a few days before this that he was going to need to go back to Europe for a couple of weeks for a work thing. And as far as I knew, he would be leaving a few days after I get back to Mexico. So I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have this conversation with him. I'm going to have to go through this thing by myself. There was so many feelings, so many emotions. He comes, he picks me up from the airport. We're in the Uber on the way to my apartment. And then he tells me, oh, this work trip I'm going on is actually going to be a month long. I'm so anxious about this conversation that we have to have when we get back to my apartment. And he's telling me now he's going to be gone even longer. And I was just like so overcome with emotion. I'm just like looking out the window away from him, tears streaming down my face, so stressed out. And then he's also asking me in the car, he's like, I want to introduce you to my family before I go. My nephew is going to have a birthday party this weekend and I want you to come to the party and meet my family. There's just so much. There's too much. I just felt so overwhelmed. And we get back to my apartment and I'm like, Daniel, I have to tell you something. It's really hard for me to share, but I am pregnant. He was clearly in a complete shock. He didn't look at me. He didn't talk to me. He was just staring into space. And I just waited and waited. Like, is he going to say anything? I just was clear with him about where I stood with it. And he kind of snapped out of whatever fog he was in. And he was like, well, of course, it's your choice. I fully support you, whatever you want to do. I would never try to push you to have the child. And I just felt relieved. I felt so relieved because I really thought that he was not going to respond that way. And I felt very supported, and I felt very loved. And also just a part of me was a little bit confused because I asked him how he felt, if he was sad, because I knew that we weren't really on the same page when it came to kids. He was just like, well, of course, it's sad to me. Of course, it's something that I want, but I support you making the choice that's best for you. It was another moment where something about it felt not sincere. And it wasn't like, oh, he's just saying that so I don't feel bad or guilty. It was just like something about the dynamic was also just a little bit strange. But at the same time, I just felt such a big sense of relief. And so we're like, okay, what are we going to do? And he said, well, I'm going to find a place that you can go, a place that is reputable, where we know the doctors are going to take good care of you. I will change my flight because he was supposed to fly out the day after this birthday party of his nephew's. And we ended up scheduling the abortion for that day. And he changed his flight for 2 days later, I think. And he was very insistent that he wanted to be there with me to support me through it. We ended up going to this birthday party where, I don't know, we had some kind of miscommunication. Honestly, at this point, after everything that happened, I don't know if it was a miscommunication or if it was somehow intentional to create anxiety for me. I don't really know, but it was like we had some kind of miscommunication. And I was under the impression that his whole family knew I was pregnant and I was going to be getting an abortion the next day. And it was just the most uncomfortable thing I have ever experienced, that we are like at this birthday party. There are all these children running around. There was a baby shower happening in the park right next to us. I just felt horrible and also just physically horrible. I was so nauseous. It was like a very hard experience. And I actually love kids. I don't want to have any of my own, but I love them so much. And it was like, I felt like I couldn't actually engage with the kids or play with the kids because then everybody would be looking at me thinking about how horrible and hypocritical I was, that I was going to be terminating this pregnancy the day after. And it was just, oh God, it was just one of the worst days, really. One of the worst days. We go the next day. I have the procedure. Then 2 days after that, he left for this work trip to Europe that was supposed to be a month. And we had plans to go to Greece together in the summer. This was the beginning of May when he left, and he was supposed to come back in June. And we had plans to go to Greece in late July, and we were going to go to my cousin's wedding together in August, and he was going to meet my family and all this stuff. The weirdness that had started happening when he had come back in February, the weirdness that happened during our trip in March, it got amplified by 1,000. It was so strange. He was so different while he was away. He almost never texted me. Let's just FaceTime once a week. Let's just connect. I'm too busy. There's too much going on with work. I have this project I need to do. He was saying that I was asking too much of him, that I was being very demanding. And I was like, I literally just want to talk to you one time a week. I don't think that I'm asking too much, but it was just like I was putting him in such a difficult position because he had so much to do. But then there would be times when I would ask him, like, oh, what did you do this weekend? And he's like, not really anything. I just watched YouTube videos all day. And I was like, oh, again, this inconsistency, this incongruence. There were so many things that he would say that didn't add up or didn't make sense, or that he would say one thing and then he would say something a few days later that totally contradicted it. This was happening so much. And I was so anxious, so unsettled. I was so stressed out all the time, and I was so confused. And he just kept extending his trip and saying that he couldn't come back and he needed to stay there for this reason or that reason. He would also try to kind of change situations, like change how they happened, and tell me that something that didn't happen did happen, or that I said something I never said, or that he said things he never said. And I mean, we all, have like flawed memory. We all remember details of things incorrectly, but this was not that. It was so clearly not that. He was just trying to convince me that my perception of reality was wrong. And I remember one time I told him that he was gaslighting me, because that's really what he was doing. And he asked me what that meant. And I told him, and he didn't say anything. He just didn't respond at all. And at this point, I was very attached to this person. But there had been a lot of things that had happened that had created that attachment. I couldn't see what was really happening. I couldn't see things for what they really were. And there was so much kind of performing that had happened in the beginning months that I had what I felt like in my mind was a very clear picture of who this person was that actually was not real, but I couldn't see that it wasn't real. This was really because of things that I'll talk about more next week around the lessons that I learned, but this was more around the love bombing that had happened in the beginning, this tactic called mirroring that had happened in the beginning. All these things that kind of had created this attachment with this person where it became so difficult for me to disentangle from him, but also so hard for me to see things as they really were and for what they really were. And it was like something in me knew the whole time, this is off, this doesn't make sense, this isn't right. But it was like I couldn't really accept that. And it was just such a confusing, anxiety inducing situation. And like I said, this work trip kept getting extended, extended, extended to the point where it was like he wasn't coming back before we were meant to go to Greece. I was going to Greece by myself, and he was supposed to meet me there. There's so many details I am not sharing, but all the details leading up to that were absolutely maddening. And I felt like I was losing my literal mind, like I was literally losing my mind. And I get to Greece. And I was like, are you actually coming to Greece? Are you actually coming? And he said, yes, I already booked my ticket. And we had already reserved an Airbnb, but I kept asking him to send me his ticket, his itinerary, and he wouldn't send it. I don't think he actually has a ticket booked. And I don't think he's actually going to come. And why is he telling me that he is? The flags are flying, the alarm bells are going off. And I am just like, what is going on, really? And I decided to look through his Instagram. I just felt desperate. Like, I need some kind of answers. I need some kind of insight. I need a clue. I'm looking at the pictures, I'm looking at the comments. There has to be somebody else that he is with, that he's been seeing. I need to figure it out. I need some kind of direction. Like, I need something to give me some kind of clarity. What I noticed as I was looking through his Instagram is that there had been some photos of him in the tagged photos that I had seen when we first started dating. And there had been these pictures of him where he had been tagged by this woman named Grace. And I had assumed that Grace was like a friend, somebody he had grown up with here in Mexico, because they were in Mexico, the tagged pictures. There were none where it was just the two of them. There were these carousels of different events or kind of outings, and they were with groups of people. And I had just assumed at that time that she was a friend of his that he had grown up with. But now, fast forward, I'm in Greece, like, what the actual fuck is happening? And I'm looking, and those tagged photos of him, the photos that actually included him, had been removed from the carousels. That's really weird because why would a friend do that? That probably wasn't just a friend. So then I'm looking at her page and her posts. Some of these pictures look really familiar to me. It's like I've seen them before, and they were pictures of places. And I realized that these were pictures of places that Daniel had sent me. He had gone on a few different trips the first kind of month or two that I had known him. And I've seen these pictures before because Daniel has sent them to me. And her pictures had been posted at the same time that he had gone on these trips. And so my assumption was that he must have been on these trips with her in the time that we had started dating, which of course it's like we had just started dating and we weren't exclusive, but based on things he had told me, then if this is true, he had been lying to me and also going on trips with somebody at the same time that he is trying to convince me to be in this serious committed relationship with him. and I'm being resistant and he's pushing for it, right? So I was like, okay, this is strange. And I decided that I would ask him about it. And I did. The next day, I asked him, who is this person? And he told me that it was somebody that he had also met on Bumble, that he had gone out with her a couple of times, but that he had ended things. And he's like, yeah, we were just friends when we went on those trips. But then it was just like the more that we talked about it and the more questions that I asked, the more inconsistencies there were in the story he was telling me and in kind of how he was painting their relationship and the nature of their relationship. It was very clear that he was lying to me. We got into an argument and we ended up breaking up, and he was like, I am not coming. I can't meet your family under these circumstances. But it was like, even the way that that argument unfolded, things were twisted to such a degree that by the end of it, I was the one apologizing to him as though I had done something wrong. But it was actually so unbelievably clear that he had been lying to me. And I think, I don't know, it was like 1 or 2 days later, I had been obsessively thinking about this and asking myself, like, what actually happened and what was the real situation? And I decided that I was going to reach out to Grace. I messaged her and I told her that I had been dating him, that we had just broken up, because I had the impression that he was maybe in a relationship with her when I started dating him. And I just wanted some clarity. And if she was open to it, if she felt comfortable about it, I would appreciate having some idea of what actually happened just for my own peace of mind. And she said that they had been in a relationship, that they definitely were together when he started dating me, that he was telling her all of the same things, that he was going to move back to Mexico to be with her. And she said that he had broken up with her in February when he had come back, and she was very confused about it because it was just very out of nowhere. And they had been making all of these plans up until that point. She had been looking for apartments for them to live in when he came back, and he just cut it off with her very unexpectedly, and she was very confused. In talking to her, I put together that there was a day that we had gone on a date and that he had to go from the date to a friend's birthday party. And we shared an Uber that dropped him off at this birthday party. And then I went home, and it turns out it was her birthday. And he had spent her birthday on a date with me and then had gotten dropped off at her party. And then she told me when he had actually left Mexico, which was not when he had told me he had left. He had been here for 2 or 3 weeks after he had told me he had left. In that time, he had been sending me pictures from Italy. Like, he had sent me a photo of him preparing his coffee in Italy the day after he had supposedly left Mexico. That piece of information for me was like, oh my God, everything makes sense. And I just started to connect so many dots and so many things that had felt so confusing to me. I was putting all the pieces together because what that indicated to me was that this was practiced behavior. He had practice doing this, painting these pictures, telling these stories. That piece of information for me was the key to unlocking some crazy puzzle of insanity. I don't know if you know that meme, Charlie from It's Always Sunny, a meme of this guy, and he looks like absolutely unhinged, and he has this wall behind him and all these like red threads connecting all these things. That was me in that moment, putting all of these pieces together. And because of that, I started to think about some of the things that he had said to me about his ex in Spain. And I was just like, oh my God, I think he has been there. I think he has been with her in Spain. Again, I'm not going to go into the details, but essentially, I was so for sure that he's been involved with her throughout this, that he's been lying to her, manipulating her. And after a few days, I contacted her as well. You know, how I had that dream that he had left me for an ex and I needed to know who his exes were. This is why I had that dream, and this is why I needed to know who they were. And so I reached out to her and I explained the situation, very similar to the message I had sent to Grace. I included some screenshots in the message that I sent her, and she was shocked because she said that they were together, that they had been together, that he had actually moved in with her in May, which is when he had left for this work trip right after my abortion. She asked me if we could get on a call, if we could have a phone call. And we talked for a really long time, which helped us put a lot of pieces of things together. The way that she was describing their relationship sounded so much like our relationship, the dynamic, this very rocky, up and down, inconsistent, breaking up all the time. That had been her experience too. And she had been with him for 6 to 7 years. And even the thing with the children, this conflict around children, they had had it too because she also didn't want to have kids. And he had been pushing and pushing and pushing for all these years. And she said she had reached the point where she was almost like ready to give in and thinking of having kids with him. And she said that it was crazy that I had messaged her when I did because she had actually stayed up the whole night thinking about their relationship and how confusing and inconsistent it was, and how she was asking herself, can I really be with this person? And it was like some of the same kinds of things that he would create arguments around, like he would do with her as well. And they had gotten into a fight and he had left and he had gone to Italy. And she said to me that it had always seemed strange to her that he had never closed off his life in Italy. Like he still had bank accounts there, he still had all these reasons that he would go there in the years that they were together. And I told her, I really think that he must have a relationship in Italy as well. And in my mind, it was this person that he said he had been in a relationship with for 10 years, and then they had broken up when he went to Hong Kong. So anyway, she and I have this conversation. She breaks up with him afterward, and he reaches out to me. He's very upset, saying that I ruined his life. I took everything from him because she didn't want to be with him anymore. And I looked at the social media of the ex, quote unquote, ex from Italy, and I had been blocked from her account. And it was like I knew that for me was the evidence that he is definitely in a relationship with her. He did this. He blocked me because he's afraid that I'm going to contact her too. And I wanted to. I really did want to, because I was like, this woman has spent 17 years with this person and her whole life is a lie. And how can I not tell her? Everyone who was around me in Greece at the time was telling me, don't pursue this anymore. Let it go. Move on with your life. You're not responsible for this. If she hasn't seen it after all this time, it's not on you to be the one to tell her. Everyone was discouraging me, but I could not. I just could not. How can I know this? How can I know this and not tell her? I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't eat. I just felt like tormented by having this information. I have to find a way to tell her. In the midst of this process, I had found out that he had been dating other people as well in the time that he was here in Mexico. When I had gone on that trip to the US, he had been going on dates and sleeping with a woman who has a mutual friend with me. There were other people, and it was just like, I cannot not find a way to tell this woman. And what I ended up doing one day was getting on my cousin's social media. And from his account, I looked at this woman's profile. I didn't want to contact her from my cousin's account. So I just looked through and tried to figure out who is somebody that I can ask, put me in touch with her or something. I ended up reaching out to this woman that I thought must have been a relative of hers. And I reached out to her. It turned out that the person I reached out to was the sister of his ex slash current girlfriend. And she was in absolute shock. And she says, "Are you aware of how long this person has been in a relationship with my sister? Based on things that I know, I'm assuming like 16 or 17 years." And she was like, "Yes, they have never broken up. They have always been together. I have grown up with this person. I have known him half my life. He's part of all my significant memories, the most important person in my sister's life. And there's no way, if you weren't showing me proof, there is no way I would believe anything that you're saying. There is no way that I could imagine this person being capable of having a second or a third or a fourth life." She and I talked for a couple of days. We sent voice notes back and forth, me just explaining in detail everything to her, her telling me about her sister's relationship with him, how their families were very close, that his parents had visited them not that long ago and stayed with them in Italy, and she was very confused as to how his family could have known about me and be okay with that. So many things. And then I asked her about children. I had even done so much research to try to figure out if these people had kids together before I reached out to Francesca. We'll call the sister Francesca, because I was concerned maybe if I found out that they had kids, it would change how I go about this. Maybe I won't reach out. I couldn't find any evidence of that. I mean, I was even checking like civil registries in Italy. I was asking my Italian friends, how can I find out this kind of information? I was really digging so deep. Anyways, I asked her about that, if maybe they wanted kids, were they not able to have kids? What was the situation with that? And she said they have never wanted to have kids. They make jokes that their cat is their child. He has never expressed any desire to have children. And so I told her about my experience with him and the other woman's experience with him and how kids was such an issue. And she was like, "Well, I can't imagine any reason other than he must have just been trying to convince you that he was serious about you, that he was trying to prove it somehow, and that the stakes felt low because you didn't actually want kids. It's just a form of manipulation, of control." She was afraid to tell her sister what was actually happening because she wasn't sure how her sister would react or respond to that. But she was very clear, "I don't want him near her. I feel sick knowing this. I feel sick knowing that she's with him. I need to get him out of there." And her decision was to confront him directly and to tell him that she knew all of this stuff. His response was to say that I was making it all up, that I had been obsessed with him, that I had been contacting all of his friends and family, that everyone had to block me. And he was just very insistent that I was making it all up. So she told him that she had spoken to Miriam, the woman living in Spain that he had a relationship with. And I did put them in touch, but they hadn't actually spoken at the time that she told him that. Oh, no, actually, she said that Miriam had contacted her. That's what she told him. And so he immediately said, "Don't respond to her. Don't talk to her. I will tell your sister everything. Don't say anything. I will be the one to do it." Maybe 1 or 2 days had gone by. Francesca had checked in on her sister. She seemed totally fine and normal. So Francesca was like, "There is no way. There's no way that he actually told her." So she put more pressure on him. And then they broke up. Again, he contacted me. Furious, he said that I enjoyed manipulating people, that he felt so bad for the things he had done, the people he had hurt, but that I enjoyed hurting people. He said I was a black hole. 2 months later, I think it was, Alexandra reached out to me and she thanked me for saving her life. That's what she said. "You saved my life. That's why I needed her to know." That's what happened. An insane story. just had a significant impact on me in so many ways. It was a lot. It was a lot. And there were some other things in there, family related, that happened in the midst of this unfolding that I didn't share, but I will tell you more about next week as I break down everything I learned from this, the realizations I had about myself, about some of my own unconscious patterns, how it was mirroring the dynamics within my family and my relationships with my parents. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you here for the next episode.